Well, good morning. I'm Clarke Englund, the Sunday school teacher for the adult Bible class at New Braunfels Bible Church. And last week we looked at Isaiah 50 and most of chapter 51, where Isaiah has been sharing a message from the Messiah, a commentary about that message from the Messiah from God, and then a question from the faithful and God's answer back to them. We saw the Messiah was expecting to suffer, but he was fully trusting God and confident in God to take care of him and to lift him up. And the faithful wondered why God wasn't acting and why he was waiting to act and why, and he was telling them, reminding them of who he was and that they shouldn't worry about things because he had them safe and sound in his arms. Well, this week we're going to look at Isaiah 51, verses 17 through chapter 52, verse 12. And so reading out of the New Living Translation again, it says, wake up, O Jerusalem. You have drunk the cup of the Lord's fury. You have drunk the cup of terror, tipping out its last drops. Not one of your children is left alive to take your hand and guide you. These two calamities have fallen on you, desolation and destruction, famine and war. And who is left to sympathize with you? Who is left to comfort you? For your children have fainted and lie in the streets, helpless as antelopes caught in a net. The Lord has poured out his fury, God has rebuked them. But now listen to this, you afflicted ones, who sit in a drunken stupor, though not from drinking wine. This is what the Lord, sovereign Lord, your God and defender says. See, I have taken the terrible cup from your hands. You will drink no more of my fury. Instead, I will hand that cup to your tormentors, those who say, we will trample you into the dust and walk on your backs. Wake up, O Zion. Clothe yourself with strength. Put on your beautiful clothes, O holy city of Jerusalem. For unclean and godless people will enter your gates no longer. Rise from the dust, O Jerusalem. Sit in a place of honor. Remove the chains of slavery from your neck, O captive daughter of Zion. For this is what the Lord says. When I sold you into exile, I received no payment. Now I can redeem you without having to pay for you. This is what the sovereign Lord says. Long ago, my people chose to live in Egypt. Now they are oppressed by Assyria. What is this? Asked the Lord. Why are my people enslaved again? Those who rule them shout in exultation. My name is blasphemed all day long. But I will reveal my name to my people, and they will come to know its power. Then at last they will recognize that I am the one who speaks to them. How beautiful on the mountains are the feet of the messenger who brings good news, the good news of peace and salvation, the good news, the news that the God of Israel reigns. The watchmen shout and sing with joy, for before their very eyes they see the Lord returning to Jerusalem. Let the ruins of Jerusalem break into joyful song, for the Lord has comforted his people, his redeemed Jerusalem. The Lord has demonstrated his holy power before the eyes of all the nations. All the ends of the earth will see the victory of our God. Get out, and leave your captivity where everything you touch is unclean. Get out of there and purify yourselves, you who carry home the sacred objects of the Lord. You will not leave in a hurry, running for your lives, for the Lord will go ahead of you. Yes, the Lord God of Israel will protect you from behind. So as we, last week as we finished that section, we saw the faithful calling out to God to awake, asking why he was delaying. And today we see the second and third stanzas of awake. And so who is telling who to awake in verse 17? Well, God is telling Jerusalem to awake. And he said, he talks about the cup of the Lord's fury. And what is that? Well, that's symbolic of God's judgment. We see that in often used in Psalms and other places where, in the New Testament even, where the cup of God's wrath, the cup of God's fury, which is symbolic of his judgment, is poured out on the nations. In this case, Israel had experienced this captivity. First, the northern tribes went into captivity in Assyria, and Judah into Babylon. And, you know, we see that they drained the cup, including the dregs. And verses 18 to 20 really describe how fully they drank that, drinking it all gone, including the dregs. And, we saw that their children were dead, and that they experienced destruction and desolation, famine and war and captivity. There was no one left. And that the children would lie in the streets. And we even see that in the next verse where God's message to them is that I have finished my judgment of you, and I will take the cup and I will give it to, and implied the refilled cup of wrath, the refilled cup of fury to those who oppress you, who make you lie down in the streets. And that thing that lie down in the streets like an antelope caught in a net, that was an ancient practice in the Middle East there, where the conquerors would make the people of the city lie down on the streets alive, and then they would trample them on their horses and animals as they came into town. Just an awful way to treat those that you've conquered. But it is to show that you are ultimately in authority, and God is saying, don't worry, you no longer have to do that. I'm going to give the cup of my fury to those who treat you that way. And we see he used the phrase, you are drunk, but not with wine. And I think as we look at this, that, partly it's they've drunk in and taken in the life that they have in captivity, and they're enamored by it, and they don't want to give it up. When we see that people are drunk, they need help. They need to be led by the hand, because they're not coherent. They're not capable of making smart decisions. And often, if they're so drunk, they're shell-shocked and they're overwhelmed, and the eyes are glass and there's nothing going on. And that's kind of the way God is saying, I'm going to take care of you. You've been drunk by wine. You're overcome by all of this, partly because you've bought into your captivity and the way of life of your captors. And the second awake is, from who to who. God is talking to Zion. And there's just we say, well, what is the difference between Zion and Jerusalem? Well, Zion is, to me, more of a term of endearment for Jerusalem, for God. Zion is God's city. And so that's a term of endearment he uses. We tend to use them interchangeably. But it's, like I said, it's that loving touch, that gentle nudge for him. And when we compare, it's interesting to compare chapter 52, 1 and 2, as he's telling Zion to awake. We look at that message, and it reminds us of the message of God to Babylon back in chapter 47. And we see that God's message to Babylon was, you are pretty, you are royal, well, you're going to sit in the dust, you're going to lose your throne, you're going to work and grind meal, you're going to uncover yourself, so your clothes are going to come off, and you're going to be in the river, and your nakedness will show. And it's a total, everything you value is going to go away. And in Zion, he's saying, clothe yourself in strength and beautiful clothes, rise from the dust, sit in a place of honor, and no more will you be a slave, but you will be freed from working. And so the contrast is so stark. In Babylon, it is a message of judgment. In Zion, using literally the same picture, it's a message of redemption, and how he is speaking to Zion. Awake, awake to be redeemed. In verse 3, he says, I sold you for nothing, and didn't receive any money for you, and I will redeem you without paying any money. I sold you as punishment. I didn't sell you as a weakness. I didn't need to receive anything. I didn't get anything. Wasn't paid anything. It wasn't because I was weak. I sold you because of your sin. And some of the commentators will say they sold themselves because they went and pursued other gods. And yeah, that was partly true. God allowed them to go off into exile because he was judging them for their sin against him. And they will be redeemed by God's mercy without him having to pay money for it. But it's interesting, it will cost him. And we will see that as we go on further. In 4-6, his name is blasphemed. It talks about his name is blasphemed daily in the lands because of they have been taken into slavery, and their conquerors are bad-mouthing God. Their conquerors are bad-mouthing Israel each and every day. They're bragging about how they were able to conquer Israel and conquer Israel's God. God knows better, and Israel knows better. They didn't conquer Israel's God. God allowed this. God sent them there, but they're blaspheming him. And God says, I will reveal myself to you, Israel. I will reveal myself in power, and you will know who I am, and you will recognize this is what I've said. And they will return to him. And he brings us even further out and explains this. He expounds on this in the next couple verses. And he says, it's like the watchman on the tower looking for help. The city's under siege, and the watchman is there looking desperately for help. On the horizon, somebody's got to come for help. And he sees help, and he starts singing and rejoicing for joy as the city joins in that chorus, and they sing out, praising God for coming to the rescue, praising God for his victory. And we've seen that in history. Some would say the Battle of the Bulge, there's town waiting for help, and American soldiers came through and rescued them. We've seen it in certainly when we look later on, we see it at Hezekiah's time, as Sennacherib has the city under siege. We see that in literature. But in here, it's the watchman is waiting in Jerusalem. The watchman is waiting in Zion, looking for the Lord to return. And he sees them, and he rejoices in great song. And God's message to them in 11 and 12, he says, I called you in verse 1 to put on beautiful clothes, and now I'm calling you to purify yourself and to set yourself aside. Rejoice for my salvation. And, you don't need to run in panic when I come. When I come into the city, you will be saved. You will bring everything out. Take your time, pack everything up to bring it home. Purify yourself, because you're going to be carrying home the objects from the temple, my sacred objects, my temple treasure. You're going to carry that home. And so be purified, be patient, and pack carefully for the journey home. I have rescued you, and you are my people. And we see, the lessons for today is lessons of hope, really. God still acts. He defends his own people. He often waits for us to realize we need help. If we act or get a victory without us realizing that it was God that gave the victory, we're missing the point. And that's why he waits for us. Like Gideon. Had Gideon taken on the army, the Syrian army, with 30,000 volunteers, he and Israel would never have likened the victory to God acting for them. But Gideon went into battle with 300 against 100,000. Yeah, God did that, not Gideon. Hezekiah was facing an opponent, and Sennacherib had never failed in a battle, and he's at the walls of Jerusalem. And overnight, 187,000 men die surrounding the city. Hezekiah can't claim any credit. Hezekiah, both Hezekiah and Gideon had fallen down, prayed to God for salvation and victory in the day. And God answered, but he waited until they recognized their need and their desire for help. And we need to be that same way. He wants us to help us, but he wants us to realize that we need the help, that we can't do it our own. And when we do, we get to experience the joy of God's redemption, the message from the mountaintop that the watchman said, beautiful are the feet of the messenger who brings good news, the gospel. And we often equate that in the New Testament with the gospel, but it's true of the good news here in the Old Testament of the Messiah coming and God coming. For us, it's the message of Jesus and salvation for all. But it's also just the beautiful, all the messages of God dealing in our life. We can take joy and experience that joy of God working in our life. And so that's the messages for us today. Trusting God that he takes care of his own, and letting us wait for him so that we will take joy and experience that joy when he comes to help us. So thanks for being a part. Again, join us next week at 8:30 on Sunday morning for more study in the book of Isaiah. Have a great week.